This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to a special summer edition of The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand. I'm Joe Hildebrand, but it's not just Joe Hildebrand with you over the next few weeks as we do a special retrospective of all the biggest stories of the year. And this is a job too big for one man to handle. And so I've brought along someone very special. She's my sister from another mister, my wife from another life, my lady who's a little bit shady, Sarah Harris.
And I was going cheap. Can I just say?
And
somehow
she's absolutely...
somehow I was invited onto your podcast, which has become 3 separate episodes over summer. But I'm excited.
Yeah,
because
I'm
I
excited
adore you,
too.
Joe.
I adore you
miss
too.
I like being back in the
I know.
broadcasting space with you.
Well, I've engineered this entire podcasting caper just so the two of us can get back together.
Oh, is this our audition tape?
This is this is happening. This is real.
Oh.
This is going to air right now. People are listening to this.
Oh, jeez.
Dozens of them.
Dozens.
Scores.
Tens of people out there.
Tens of people. Now, for those of you still listening, the first thing I want to talk about is World War III.
Oh,
I thought we'd just get the little stuff out of the way before we get into the meaty stuff. But one of the things I happen to notice about 2024 is that there are at least 3 points at which the world could instantly come to an end. So we've got the war in the Middle East and, Armageddon. That's where it's meant to happen.
Yeah.
You've got the war between Russia and Ukraine, and I know you're a big Putin guy. I know you love that guy's swagger.
Just because I named my Russian hairpiece Putin, because I like to be Putin on my hairpiece, it does not mean I am a Putin fan.
Okay, my mistake. Sorry, I must have misread the email. And, of course, the election of Donald Trump, the greatest political comeback in history. What does this mean for global stability? What does this mean for China? And so there's all these points where the world could descend or ascend into a global conflagration. And I thought we could just sort of figure that all out, stop that from happening, maybe send Vlad, your mate, a little Christmas card and say, hey, take a breath, take a seat.
Well, it's the festive season,
down.
so let's start at DEFCON 5. I'm really worried about this whole situation. Everything at the moment feels really ephemeral. Like, I wondered if this is how... Actually, do you remember about 2 years ago, at the peak of my depression, I said to you, Joe, I'm going to write a memoir.
Yep.
And your reaction was, how does it end? I don't know how this is going to end. I genuinely don't know. I mean, the Middle East scenario, that just keeps going from bad to worse. I don't know whether Assad's collapse in Syria is going to have even worse.
Well, that's the other thing. So, 4 possible flashpoints for World War.
Right. I mean, who knows? You like to say that we're going to hell in a handbasket.
Yes. Well, have you brought props?
Well, I've brought things.
So we're going to hell in a handbasket, not hell in a tote bag.
No, well, I brought some moon water along because I think we're going to need it this year. And I feel like the only way we can actually digest and predict what the hell is going to go on...
The Magic 8 Ball.
The Magic 8 Ball. The Magic 8 Ball.
Remember we had that idea for doing a podcast, you and me, where it would just be you reading tarot cards?
Yes, I left them in Melbourne.
That is not this podcast.
Okay. But listen,
it's a different one.
The thing that worries me, okay, for example, I actually remember being in Turkey probably about 2011 when...
Pre-Erdogan?
Yeah, Assad's regime had kicked off, and we were speaking to a bunch of Syrians who'd fled over some drinks. And it kind of blows my mind that, what was 13 years and all of a sudden this regime has collapsed. Remember when he first got in, how it was said to be this it was supposed to be hopeful for the West. I mean, he was having dinner. He was having
yeah.
dinner with
He was the great
Brangelina.
that's right. It was going to be
His
a
wife-
cultural centre. He was tolerant towards Christians.
He's the dorky ophthalmologist.
Damascus was the Paris of the East.
That's it. He was having dinner with Brangelina. I mean, his wife was doing these softball puff pieces in Vogue. I think they were calling her the Rose of the Desert. Look how badly that turned out.
Well, this is the thing. So the problem with the Middle East generally, as everybody knows, is that all these nation states are kind of fabricated. I'm not blaming everything on colonialism. Oh, it's all the British and French fault for blah, blah, blah. I mean, it is a bit their fault. But also the Ottoman Empire joined World War I on the side of the Kaiser. So they joined the bad guys. They had to pick a side. Okay, fine, fair enough, whatever. But they joined the Germans. They lost. They backed the wrong horse. Sorry, guys, bad luck. We get to carve up your empire now. And so that is what's happened. The result of that has been that you need a strong man and not a democratic strong man to actually hold power. You need to be able, this is the theory anyway, you need to be able to basically crack a few heads together, make sure that none of these sort of warring tribes get out of line. And that's the only way you can prevent basically anarchy. And Saddam Hussein is an obvious example, and Bashir al-Assad is another obvious example. And the problem with these guys is they're nasty people. They're horrible, horrible, horrible people, and they do horrible things to their populations. But once they go, do you just get someone even worse?
That's right. I mean, was it when the Taliban was elected back in the 90s?
That's right.
I mean, they were celebrated.
They won it
right?
fair and square.
But they were celebrated because they kind of toppled the warlords.
That's right. Well, the Taliban
And
were
now
backed.
look at-
The Taliban were backed by the US against the Russians.
Yeah.
The Taliban's were like, if you watch Rambo 3, right? The people he's working with, that Sly Stallone, the great American hero, is working with in Rambo 3 are basically the Taliban. And he uses them to get rid of the Russians, and then of course they get replaced with something else. And then you get you got the Taliban replaced by the sort of US coalition forces, and then suddenly they just came back. But that's another story. But again, if you look at Iraq, what happened as soon as Saddam Hussein gets toppled?
Power vacuum.
Power vacuum. And you have the Shiite power base, I think it was, that replaces the Ba'athist. And the Ba'athists are these weird kind of socialist, nationalist kind of crazy people, these sort of Arab nationalists, right? And so you've got them, and they're sort of a political movement with different strands. So that was Saddam. That was also basically Assad in Syria as well. But then Saddam, he's a horrible man, a dictator, kills people, tortures people. But you get rid of him, and suddenly ISIS. Suddenly, because of course you've got people who are saying, right, now the Shiites are in charge, and they say, right, now we're going to, screw you. You've been pushing us around and telling us what to do and oppressing us for too long. And then suddenly the Sunnis feel like they're the oppressed ones. The Sunnis used to be the good guys. Remember that? Iran-Iraq war, we were on Iraq's side, and Sunni versus Shia. So the Sunnis are now upset, and we think they're the kind of more peaceable Muslims. No, they're the ones who form ISIS and become worse than Al-Qaeda. They say, hey, Al-Qaeda, you know what? You're a bit soft. 9/11 didn't go far enough. And away they go.
What about the new mob that's probably going to take control of Syria?
Well, they
with
are
what
ISIS, basically.
Well, Al-Qaeda, is that what it is?
Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and there's
But they don't like Iran.
Some Turkish forces.
Okay.
And no, well, Iran and Russia were the ones who were propping up Assad. So basically, remember, 2014, peak of ISIS, they're blowing up people, they're just marching through the Levant, they're bulldozering innocent people in villages, they're blowing people up in the West, the Bataclan Theatre in Paris and everything. ISIS is going absolutely feral. And we're all going, what the hell? And all the Western forces are trying to sort of fight Assad, but fight ISIS at the same time. And of course, we couldn't do it. We got completely sucked in because we're on the side of the democratic rebels who are rising up to fight Assad. So, okay, we want to help them. The Arab Spring, yay, students who are out there, like would have been me at a young age if there were no guns. And so the West wants to help them, but as soon as they help these rebels or arm them, ISIS just comes along and says, give me your guns. And the good rebels say, no, we are fighting for democracy, not fundamentalism. And ISIS says, give us your guns or we'll kill you and your entire family. Okay, here's the guns. And this is actually what happened. All these Arab Spring protest movements right across, North Africa and the Arab world all got hijacked by extremists. And of course, that's what extremists do. They hijack things. And so the moderates always end up losing out because the extremists are always prepared to go to more extreme lengths because the clue's in the name. And so that's what's happening in Syria.
And then you look at the Russian situation.
And then, well, that's right.
But
So-
how much, and it's interesting because you're just saying that in a way that a lot of it is to do with the meddling of the West, which the West can be accused of possibly meddling as well in the Russia-Ukraine situation. How many times has Russia said it
Not
does
one
not
step further,
it does that's
NATO.
right, does not want NATO on its doorstep, and then Ukraine is pushing for a NATO membership.
This is a valid point of view. This is something that a lot of
I've got,
rational people are kind of saying.
Well,
that
I've got Ukrainian
Ukraine
friends.
poked the bear.
I've got Ukrainian friends who've said, look, obviously we don't like the slaughter of our people or the, the advancement of Russian troops into our country. But at the same time, we kind of understand that, that Russia doesn't want the West anywhere near it.
That's right. And again, it comes down to problems with how these places were drawn up in the aftermath of giant global conflicts. Like after World War II, Stalin got to take all the area between Russia and where the Red Army marched to, which was East Berlin. So he just takes everything and he can do what he wants with it. And what he does is he sets up puppet regimes in Poland and blah, blah, blah. And he does the same thing in Ukraine, of course. But Ukraine is particularly special to the Russians because, firstly, their origin story begins with I think they call them the Kiev Rus in the 900s AD. And these were supposed to be Vikings that came down from Scandinavia and then set up their first kind of trading outpost or town, settlement, whatever, in Kiev. And they were the ones that became the Russians.
Yeah.
And that's where the name comes from, the Rus. And so Putin, and he goes and tells all this propaganda to the Russians. They go, yeah. And so to the Russians, it's as though, it would be like telling Australia, oh no, sorry, Sydney wants to be its own country now. Sydney wants to be independent. That's how they're seeing it. But the amazing twist, of course, is that, I suppose, so there's all that historical stuff, but I've always thought you can't fight wars based on history. You can't fight wars trying to do or undo history. This is how you have to deal with the world. You have to deal with the world as it is now. We're here now. We're in this mess now. How do we go forward? How do we progress? I think all these conflicts, Russia and Ukraine, Israel and Palestine, they're all still going. They're all still live and people are still being killed because people are arguing over history. People are arguing over what happened before, whose fault it was, who started it. And the truth is, of course, you can make any argument on any side for whose fault it is and who started it, and it will suit your purpose. In the meantime, people get killed, people die of old age while these conflicts are still going, they don't get resolved. One of the big sticking points in Israel versus Palestine is all these displaced refugees in, say, the West Bank who...
Or on the border of Lebanon, like six
on the border of
generations
That's right, who are still saying that
who are
and
being
do not want to
able to go back
They don't
to
want
their
to go
homes.
anywhere else. They don't want to stop and move on with a new life because they're constantly being told, no, you have to hang in there. You have to hold on to this historical claim of your parents or your grandparents to getting your house back that you lost in 1967 or 1948 or whatever it was.
That right of return, yeah.
And the right of return. And so, of course, that makes it impossible to practically progress a peace plan because you're fighting over trying to restore, to bring back a piece of history, to bring back things as they were at a fixed point in time. And that is obviously impossible to do without a time machine. And yet that seems to be what is consuming both sides. And so I think you have to say, right, what are the practical things we can do now in the meantime to actually move forward? So you're starting from a position of Israel and Palestine each denying the other's right to exist. You shouldn't be here, you shouldn't be here, yada, yada, yada. All right, well, one of the other big grievances of people on the West Bank, for example, is that Israel charges too much for its water and electricity, which is something I think all Australians can relate to. High power bills. It pisses people off here and it pisses people off there. So, again, you could just say, all right, we will provide you power and electricity at the exact same price that Israel pays for it. Okay, how about that? Nice little gesture of goodwill, you know? And then you can talk about, you know, the settlers being in places where they definitely shouldn't be. I mean, this isn't even sort of contested. The Israeli settlers are in places there's no way they should be. And, you know, say, all right, well, we'll move back here. And then if the Palestinians say, great, thanks very much, well, we're still going to wipe you out, we still don't acknowledge the right to exist. Well, sure, maybe you've, you know, lost a couple of minor details in the negotiating agreement, but you haven't really lost anything, and you've gained the moral high ground. One of the reasons the settlers are where they are because it's the physical high ground, they reckon, it for strategic purposes. Crazy. What? So you can get a gun and, like, man the outpost?
Isn't it that if they let the Palestinians move into that area, this is what they argue, that they would have line of sight to the airport? Or
that's right. So, again, this is where you get into sort of conspiracy there. You know what?
Yeah.
You're already at war. It can't get much worse, can it? So,
and what about in Russia and Ukraine? Isn't Zelensky's sticking point that he's happy to let Russia keep the land that's already been taken as long as Ukraine can enter NATO, which is just a absolute no from Russia, right?
Yeah, but I don't know. With Trump now in charge and telling Zelensky's telling Putin that he's got to cut a deal, and with Zelensky knowing that maybe US aid might not be as forthcoming as it was, I think you will suddenly get to that point. And again, if Ukraine gives back the eastern sort of Russian-speaking parts of the country, and frankly, Crimea probably should have gone to Russia in the first place anyway. There's an argument, but you'd hold a referendum in the Russian-speaking parts. If the majority said, yes, we want to be with Russia, you go, okay, fair cop, leave the rest of us alone. But I think it would be reasonable to say, well, as an added area of protection, we've just ceded all this territory to you. The least you can do is give us NATO, and Putin might cop that. And again, does that restore things? You know, that doesn't put things back to the way they were at some fixed point in time. That, you know, the Kiev Rus and the Vikings, you know, don't suddenly take over the capital city of Kyiv again. And NATO didn't even exist back when, you know, these first decisions were being made. But it's something you can live with. You say, well, we're here now, and this is something we can live with. This is the most practical thing we can get. And then people get used to it. And then that's your new sticking point for the next war in 50 years' time.
Or as Justin Timberlake put it, Crimea River. It feels like, you know, for all the pondering, you know, are we already in the middle of World War III? I think the signs, and I don't even need the magic 8-ball for this, the signs point to yes. We're already in it.
We're in the middle of World Skirmish 3.
Yeah.
Although it'd probably been more than
how much of that is because of us, because of Western interference?
I think,
and like you see that kind of mood is changing in the States, in the United States. They don't want to be involved in any more foreign wars. They're sick of
American
sending
exceptionalism,
billions of dollars overseas to be part of a war that has nothing to do with them.
Yeah, that's right. And again, you can totally understand that. And there are plenty of wars that the West starts, or rather responds to things happening overseas, where there's often a call for them to come in and protect, Kuwait, for example, or another,
where there's a vested interest,
or where there happens to be a lot of oil. They seem to come a bit quicker.
Yeah.
But 9/11, where it's like, well, we have to do something. Like, they have to do something. And America is usually pretty terrible at fighting guerrilla wars or, invading
so we'll
Cuba.
Go after a country that wasn't involved.
That's right. So we're just going to turn this terror war into an actual war where the enemy's there and it's somewhere we can see and somewhere we can bomb, and we think it's Saddam Hussein and we've got this intelligence. Didn't turn out to be right, but whatever. And of course, Afghanistan as well and all that stuff. So it does do these things and it does go into their areas and screw them up. But I think there's two things. One is, once you've gone in there and messed it up, you have to clean up that mess. And the other thing, of course, is that sometimes you actually really do need the Americans to come in, because the last time there was a bunch of America First rhetoric around, there was actually a movement called America First, was a whole bunch of people who were urging America not to get involved in World War II.
Yeah.
Just let the Nazis do their thing. It's not our problem, not our fight. Don't get involved. Turn that boat away with all the Jews on it. And Britain's entire survival strategy during the Battle of Britain, during the Blitz, was to get the Americans to come on board. And Winston Churchill famously said, the Americans will always do the right thing once they've tried everything else. So once they've run out of all other options, they go, okay, fine, we'll come and help you beat the Nazis. And so there is that. But the other thing, how's this for a nice twist though? Maybe a bad twist. The West's intervention in at least some ways has actually brought about the downfall of Assad in Syria, because the only reason his regime has collapsed, no one saw this coming. All these rebels, just started taking town after town after town after town.
Iran was weakened.
Because Iran was
Israel.
concentrating on Israel, supported by the West, but Iran was concentrating on Israel, and so couldn't send Hezbollah and its other troops to help Syria. And Russia was too busy fighting Ukraine, which was being supported by the West, and so didn't have any resources to help Syria out. And so suddenly Syria, all on its little...
Do you have a good feeling about
lonesome.
Trump? I mean, Trump's famously declared that he could end, the war with Russia and Ukraine in a day, sort out the Middle East in just as much time. Do you have hopes that he can do that?
Do you know what, Sarah? I do have a good feeling about Donald Trump. And I think
do too,
you
but
have a good feeling about Donald
I have a great feeling
Trump.
about Donald Trump, but
And
in this regard, I mean, is it beyond solving?
I do not think it is beyond solving, but I think it needs something brand new and exciting that is way out of what people have been doing before. And I think we should talk about this next week on The Real Story when we discuss the comeback of Donald J. Trump.
Can we just put do you think...
Oh, you have to do the 8 ball. Okay,
Yeah,
okay. What's the question?
Okay. we
Is
can only
World
ask-
War...
Yeah. So hang on. 2025.
Yeah.
Will we be engulfed in World War III? You may rely on it.
What a way to go.
Want to go me halves in one of those underground bunkers?
All right. Well, look, I think we've successfully solved all the world's problems. But Sarah Harris, come back next week and we will discuss the comeback of all comebacks by the comeback king, Donald J. Trump, Time Person of the Year. And that is all we have time for this week. Of course, if you like what you hear, give us a rating, give us a review. Only the 5-star works, and only ones with lots of nice emojis works if you're leaving the review as well. You can drop us a line at therealstory@novapodcast.com.au, or you can hit me up on the gram, Joe_Hildebrand, slide into my DMs. And if there's anything you want discussed, anything you want to say, even if you just want to tell us how much you love the show, we'd be more than happy to hear you out. And of course, you can catch me in the Daily Telegraph and other news mastheads around the country every Monday and Saturday. Until then, see you next week.